Death, disability, and divorce. It's important that if you have a farm LLC, that you have a strong farm LLC buy-sell agreement. Watch this video to learn more. Hi, I'm Jason Wagner, the farm lawyer. I work with family farmers every single day to help them pass the farm on to the next generation. At my law firm, Wagner, we've been doing it for over 50 years. Today, I want to talk to you about buy-sell agreements. And a buy-sell agreement would typically come into place when, say, we've got a farm LLC or a corporation or a partnership that maybe we've moved the land or machinery into. And a very kind of typical or traditional way to set these up is we would probably have a land partnership, or the land would be in a trust, and the operating assets, machinery, equipment, inventories, livestock, prepaids, all of that would go into the operating LLC. Now, the operating LLC gives us an opportunity to transfer a little bit of the moving bits and pieces of the farm at a different pace or in a different way than, say, the land. The land is our long-term asset. That's our gold bar. We need to hold on to that until we're ready and confident that this farm succession plan is going to work. But the operating assets, we can now start to move to the next generation. But we would not do that just, naked or without any protection. We would want to do it through an LLC, because that allows us now to package the whole thing up, move little bits and pieces, but also wrap that LLC around with a buy-sell agreement. Now, that buy-sell agreement is going to have your protections built into it. So what it does, it gives us the confidence to be able to start actually moving ownership to the next generation. That buy-sell agreement addresses things such as death, disability, divorce, voluntary withdrawal, or other involuntary withdrawal situations. So that if our farming heir is owning, say, 5%, 10%, 20% of the operating assets, and all of a sudden they're facing a divorce, or they, decide, what, I'd rather go sell avocados on the side of the road in California than stay here with you. We have a plan. We know what's going to happen. So that buy-sell agreement, first off, it will tell us, how do we value this operation? Are we going to use an appraisal? Are we going to take the balance sheet that we put together every year? We can also use something that's called a stipulated value or an agreed value. This is where, we get together every year or every 18 months and say, hey, if something happens to me in the next 12 months or 18 months, here's the number. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fair market value of the assets. It could just be, here's what we think is fair that the farm can afford if something happens to me in the next 12 to 18 months. I don't mind using that stipulated value or agreed value. I also just think it's difficult to keep updated, and more often than not, I've seen that people forget to update it, and then, we usually revert to a different method anyways. It's important that your buy-sell, if it does have a stipulated value or agreed value, puts an expiration date on that. We probably don't want to be using a agreed value from 20 years ago that doesn't expire, right? If we said the value of this farm's $200,000 and now it's worth $2 million, but that agreed value never expired, we might be subject to that. So I like to draft it that if we haven't updated that agreed value within a certain period of time, say 18 months, it automatically expires, and now we go to an alternative valuation method, which, the appraisal works. We appraise all the underlying assets. I kind of like the balance sheet value too. Again, this is one that does require a bit more maintenance, because basically what we would do is make sure that we're producing a balance sheet for the LLC every year. And then we put it into the company records, we adopt it, and now that becomes basically the fixed value for that year. Now, on top of that, we can also do discounts. Say I give 10% to my farming heir and they decide they want to get out the year later. Well, I'm not going to buy you out at, 10% of fair market value of these assets. What was the point of that? I gifted you so I could buy it back? No. So we would usually have a discount, and maybe it can be a sliding scale discount. It could start out very steep, 75%, 50%, go down to 20%. Why all these discounts? Well, the reality is that you don't own the whole thing. So who's going to pay you fair market value of 100% of 1/3 of a tractor or 10% of a tractor? You're already going to have to take a discount because you're not selling the whole tractor. You're selling a piece of the tractor in theory, right? So that is why we back it off. Also, there's this vesting idea. You shouldn't get 100% value right away and risk the farm that we now have to buy that back at a huge price because it appreciated in value. We have this equity here, it's sweat equity. We don't want to do that. And then second is we have to think about, how is that purchase price going to get paid? Is this going to get paid over time? Is this going to be paid all at once there's the triggering event? Again, this is something where, hey, the objective is to protect the farm, and the best way to do that is to allow that to be paid off over time. So I usually do structure that as an installment note, usually at the AFR, low interest rate. There might be a balloon payment in there depending on the value and how realistic it would be to be able to actually pay the balloon payment in, say, 5 years or 10 years. But, if we're going to protect the farm, we usually want to have that on an installment basis. The one exception to that is death. If death is a triggering event, there may be life insurance, or we could build life insurance into it. So maybe we go get a $500,000 policy or $1 million policy, and if there's a death, now we would use that as a way to fund the buyout, and we wouldn't necessarily have to have it structured out over an installment period. But if they just abandon the farm, we're not going to be able to just go and get a big check for them right away. We want to discount that first off, right off the bat. Then we want to structure it and pay it out over a longer period of time so that the farm itself doesn't suffer due to them leaving. So then there's the triggering event. Again, did someone die? Is our farming heir getting divorced and now somebody else is trying to grab onto the ownership? Maybe they have a judgment creditor or they're going through a bankruptcy. Again, someone else is trying to grab onto that ownership. Or, like I say, they just want to leave voluntarily. I'm out of here. This isn't for me. I gave it a shot. We made a judgment call. We transferred shares to them, but it's not going to work out. So those are the triggers. So the steps would be identify the triggers, and then identify how we fix the purchase price. And then third, how are we going to pay that purchase price to make sure that the farm is going to survive? So you would not want to enter into or start gifting farm assets, in my opinion, without a strong buy-sell agreement. This is especially important for larger operations. It is a great way for us to be able to start transferring assets during life. We're not just saying, you'll own this when I die. Well, thanks very much. I'll be 75 years old at that time. We're allowing them to start taking ownership. I have some cases where, we've had transition to people that are 25, maybe even a little younger, to start allowing them to get that equity, to start transitioning it. And that allows us to transition it, over a long period of time. We're moving little bits every year, but it's always subject to the buy sell. And that gives mom and dad the confidence and ability to know that they're moving in the right direction. And remember, the land's over here. We don't have to move that yet. We might move it later. We might allow that to go through the estate plan, but right now we're focusing on moving the operating assets. But in both cases, it's important that you have a strong buy-sell agreement so that if something goes unexpected, we know that the farm is going to be protected. If you like what you hear, check out farmlawyer.com, follow me on Facebook, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.